Hello, I'm Miles Showell. I'm a mastering engineer here at Abbey Road Studios in London, and one of the things I'm most famous for is mastering at half speed, which is a vinyl master system whereby you run the original source at half the normal speed and the cutting lathe, which is the machine behind me here, at half the speed as well. So they're both locked together at half speed. The reason for this is because records are a mechanical recording, so the sound waves you hear from your speakers are recorded on the record as a wavy groove, so the groove's constantly undulating and going up and down and side to side. And it can be quite stressful for the amplification system and the mechanical cutter to cut this. If you think of a tambourine in a record, it may have a 15 kilohertz component in that tambourine. That's 15,000 air cycles per second. The only way you can hear that on your record is if the recording stylus in the cutter head in the machine vibrates at 15,000 times a second. To do that, it gets very hot and it draws lots of current. So it's a far better idea to run the lathe at half the speed, so that 15 kilohertz signal becomes 7.5 kilohertz, which is upper mid-range, much easier to cut, much less stressful for the system. Typically, when you're doing a half-speed cut, the cutter head will draw between a quarter to a third of the current it would need to draw at real time. So the whole system's not being pushed to its limits. It can cut records far more cleanly, and you generally get much nicer, more natural sounding high frequencies. There are problems with half speed. The biggest problem is de-essing. That's when you have an S sound in a vocal. And you can't use the limiter you would use at real time because it's looking at the wrong frequency. You know, if the S frequency in the voice is, say, 6 kilohertz, at half speed it's at 3 kilohertz, so the limiters can't see it because it's looking at 6. So I'll have to actually go in and manually fix every S in every song before I cut it. And that's why I tend to do my half speed mastering from higher resolution digital, because I can then go in with the digital tool and just fix the S's. Which is quite time consuming. It takes a long time. I'll often sit at home actually and do it at home with headphones on, some really nice headphones I've got. And I'll go through and I'll fix the S and I just think, oh yeah, sharp S, stop, wind back and zoom in, find the S, draw around it, pull it down a little bit, right back. But that's better in a way because when I'm doing normal speed cutting, if I have a limiter, it catches everything. So there could be a bright guitar or a snare drum hit or any kind of percussion or triangle or anything, a tambourine. It would smooth all of those things out because it can't differentiate between the bright guitar or the snare drum or the tambourine and a vocal. It just thinks, oh, that looks a bit nasty, I better just smooth it out. And the reason why you would do that is to avoid sibilance and distortion on the playback. The human voice is about the hardest thing. The human voice and solo piano, the hardest things to play back accurately. And a voice with lots of energy, with lots of high frequency information, you'll find that the S in a word, let's say the word snap, would just distort and you get a nasty, tearing, distorted sound. But with clever de-essing, you can smooth it enough to make it playable and it sounds lovely. So that's the only real drawback. Another drawback, I guess you could say, is that I have to listen to the music at half the speed, and that's pretty terrible. I may give you an example later. I'll play some music at half speed. And I've had 14-hour days here in the studio with non-stop half-speed music, and you walk out of here and you're thinking, oh, I'm going crazy. But then, after a few weeks, the records come back from the factory and you put them on, and they just sound unbelievable. You just get this otherworldly effect that you don't get cutting at real time. And here's a little bit of a song called Hey Boy, Get Off of That Dream at half speed, and you'll hear how awful it is. And some days I have literally 14 hours non-stop of music like that. And it's quite funny for 5 minutes, but trust me, after 14 hours, it's really difficult. But like I said, when you get the records back from the factory, they just sound incredible. So it's worth it. I put that effort in because I know that at the end of the day, when I get the music back from the pressing plant, it's going to sound really good. I just had some old albums that I got in the early 80s when I was still at school. My dad had a record shop and I got some hi-fi pressings mostly from Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs there in California. And they had an engineer there called Stan Ricker, and he was cutting stuff, and I got the Dark Side of the Moon album. That's a famous one of theirs. And a couple of Beatles albums, the Abbey Road album, and I think I had Magical Mystery Tour. And on the whole, they sounded really good, especially Dark Side of the Moon, just unbelievably open and clean and just not like a record. And all throughout my career when I started, I said to people, wow, let's do half speed, it sounds so great. And no, it's too complicated. Because it's not as simple as just running the lathe at the wrong speed and running the source at the wrong speed. There's other filters and equipment in the amplifiers which have to be adjusted for half speed. All records have a EQ curve on them applied to them, and if you run it at half speed, the EQ curve's wrong. So I've had to have a special filter made. It's called the RIAA filter, and I have a special filter that flips between normal cutting and half speed cutting, and to get that built was quite complicated, and nobody wanted to do that until about 15 years ago. And I got chatting to a kind of maverick, crazy technical engineer. Yeah, let's give it a go. Come on then. So we did. We made some test cuts and everyone seemed to like it. And then really from there, I've kind of got that ball rolling again. And now I'm quite well known for doing half speed. And when I did start, I emailed Stan Ricker, who used to have a cutting and mastering studio in California that he did. And he was really, really helpful. He couldn't believe anybody wanted to try it. And I said, yeah, I'm inspired by your work, Stan. I want to give it a go. What do you think? So he said, send me an acetate, I'll have a listen. So I did, and he came back and said, yeah, sounds good. And he gave me some tips, which were really quite helpful, because everything I'd learned about how to use the machine at real time did not apply for half speed. You have to completely learn a whole new set of skills. Everything's different. The way it reacts to the music, the way you line it up, the way you set everything, the heat for the cutting style. There's so many things you have to change, probably 9 or 10 things. So he was really helpful there, and I'm very grateful to Stan really for A, doing this in the first place and then sparking my enthusiasm, and B, helping me out. And sadly, Stan died about 3 or 4 years ago. But I'll never forget the help he gave me, because he was a great guy. So I like vinyl. There's something about it. I think because it's difficult to chop and change, you can't just go change another song, whereas with digital, with streaming, even CD, you can quickly change it over. With vinyl, you really have to kind of commit to playing 40 minutes of music. You've got to sit there and take it out carefully and put it on and not knock your arm, and then sit back and listen. And to actually decide to devote 40 minutes of your life to a piece of music or an art form is quite a rewarding experience, I find. And I get more from it from playing records. It just invites you to play it more. I'll play one album and it's like, that sparks an idea in my head. That record from 1987 that I haven't heard for 20 years, I'll go and get it and put it on. And I don't do that when I'm listening to digital media. And I don't know why that should be, but it's just something, I think it concentrates the mind on actually listening to music. Whereas with streaming, I tend to find it's background, I might be cooking and I've got Spotify in the kitchen or something. Whereas records, it's serious business, So I'm hopeful with all the new work that people are making to make new plants. There's the new plant opening very soon in Japan, which is very exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing records from there. It's an exciting time, and I'm happy to master to any format there is, but the most fun you can have as a mastering engineer is to cut records, because you've got so many things that can go wrong. If I cut it too loud, it can distort. If I set the grooves too close, they can kiss and it might jump on playback. If I cut it too quietly, you have noise. I mean, if there's sibilance I haven't allowed for, then it tears and sounds bad on a record. You know, I have to watch 4 or 5 different things. It's like juggling. You know, I've got several balls in the air all at the same time. That's much more fun than working for a digital format where, you know, is it loud enough? Is it bright enough? Okay, let's go. You know, records are fun, and they're an effort to listen to, but they pay back with the satisfaction of hearing 40 minutes of beautiful music, and they're a real effort to work on as an engineer. But if you put that effort in at home and in the studio, you can get some fantastic results.